Hello. I'd like to welcome everyone this evening to hear Alejandro Zaera-Polo, whose work is so well known to you that I'm not going to kind of give a long account of the buildings. He's here this evening as a writer, and therefore it's pertinent to say he's professor at Yale, I think visiting professor at Princeton, was obviously the dean at the Berlage, and it seems quite a long time ago that he was here teaching an immensely powerful and influential unit. But as I say, everybody knows the work at one level or another, so I think we should pass straight on for you to describe the publication, The Sniper's Log. I'd like you to join with me in welcoming Alejandro.
This is connected? Okay. Thank you for welcoming back, Mark. As you very well said, I'm here tonight as a writer and not as an architect, and the book that I'm going to present tonight is a book of writings. It's a book that was supposed to be here tonight, already finished, and is of course not here. But it will be, it's almost in its final format, and hopefully it will be out in about a month or a month and a half, perhaps. And it's a book that is going to be published by Akhtar and has been supported by Princeton University School of Architecture. The purpose of the presentation is not going to be a very long presentation, and I think that this will give us the opportunity perhaps to engage in a conversation if you feel inclined to do so after listening to the presentation. The idea of this talk is more to initiate a debate about what is writing in architecture, or what is writing in architecture today. And how this book explores certain things. I think that there are probably other issues that are embedded in the in the book that we can discuss later on. But that was my primary intention. I'm going to do something here before continuing, which is to start a slideshow that will be running for the first part of the presentation, while I explain to you a little bit how is the book put together and what it is supposed to do. So I was saying that the main argument that I am trying to address tonight is the question of how writing is related to architecture at this very moment. Writing has had a very long relationship to architecture. In fact, I would almost say that architecture as a discipline doesn't exist until there is writing. So it's almost like a parallel activity. And it has taken many forms in respect to architecture. Writing has taken many forms in respect to the discipline. Obviously, everybody has to write reports. Everybody has to write briefs, texts about projects as an architect, and so on and so forth. But if we are talking about the discipline of architecture as a locus for for writing, you can probably identify pretty quickly that there are a number of forms that have existed in the architectural writing in the past. Architects have written manuals, which are texts that say how things are properly done. Architects have written taxonomies, which basically make some sort of register or account of of what is happening and maybe what may happen by making a taxonomy. Architects have written also manifestos, which say how things should be done or will be done in the future. That is another one of the formats that architectural writing may take. And architects have written also critiques. That's probably one of the latest models of writings, the latest genre in architectural writing to emerge, which basically says what is wrong with architecture, what is wrong with things. Now, the book that I am presenting today is perhaps a little bit of everything. It's a kind of experiment. I am reluctant to say it's a new genre because I think it's a very specific situation that has allowed me to set up the book in its current form. And it is an experiment that is made possible because I was lucky enough to have a very early engagement with writing. Already as an architectural student, I was given the chance to write in El Croquis, that by then was an emerging little magazine in Madrid. And after that, obviously, I was given the chances, or maybe because of that, I was given the chances of writing in many other places, and therefore I have quite a long career as a writer. And I was myself very surprised to see that the book, without including absolutely everything, is like 500 pages thick, just simply compiling the stuff that has been published. But so one of the reasons why I did this book and I could do this book is because of that early engagement with writing, and I think maybe also because of certain incapacity to make to have the calm and the concentration to write a proper architectural manifesto or a proper architectural manual or treatise or something, which is the more traditional forms of writing books for architects. And I was actually, as I was preparing the talk, I remember that I had once a student, not here, but somewhere else, who told me, you know, I am from a generation of people who have never read a book from the beginning to the end. And I was actually quite impressed by that because he was a student telling me that he had never read a book from the beginning to the end. But I think actually that is increasingly the case with the way we relate to books. We don't have the concentration neither to sit down and write a kind of treatise, except if we are Patrick, who maybe I was here when he introduced his book, and maybe that is an interesting comparison also. But the fact is that I didn't have ever the concentration and perhaps not the will either to sit down and try to put together a proper book about something consistent in architecture. Therefore, maybe this is a book that is made out of some sort of accretion of different texts, of different formats, that is written a little bit here and there, and is perhaps to be read also in the same way. It has a certain type of, I think, potential audience that I am interested in exploring. It's a book that is a compilation. It's not a kind of totally comprehensive compilation, but it's a selection of the most interesting texts that I have written during nearly during more than 20 years. I think probably some of the first texts that I wrote were in '86. Some of the very, very early ones are not included in the book. And it's a book that has this heterogeneous material as a constitutive matter. I probably would like to say that it's a book that I like to say is made with textual artifacts. That means that the texts are produced for different reasons. They are produced to perform in many different situations or locations. Sometimes they are made to be in a kind of theoretical magazine. Sometimes they are made to. They are the text, the memo of something happening inside of the office. Sometimes they are the text that introduces a book. Sometimes there are, every one of these texts is what I call a textual artifact, whose aim is not to set up some sort of theoretical approach overall, but on the contrary, to affect a very particular and concrete situation that existed at the time when the text was made. And therefore, the title of the book, The Sniper's Log, because it's really like a collection of shots, as if you are shooting at different things that appear before your crosshair, and you try to somehow hit it with this kind of textual artifact. So it's not a book that has a kind of big strategic plan, battle plan, if you want. It is more of a collection of tactical writing devices operating in different conditions. Now, what brings all these items together is actually me. It's a book that, as I started to group the texts together, I realized that the only thing that links them is the fact that I wrote them, and that was in one way one of the earlier interests of the book. I thought that it was interesting to try to explore with it in what way theory is related to biography, is related to concrete, real events or situations. So that I thought was also implicit in the way that the book was being put together, but at the same time I also thought it was the weakness. So the kind of biographical nature of this compilation of texts was actually the thing that from the very beginning of trying to frame the book, I tried to in a way fight against. And that is also the reason why I started looking into the idea of a generation, in a way to feel myself a little bit more supported on, if you want, my peers. So the reason why the book it has the subtitle Architectural Chronicles of Generation X has the intention of saying, okay, these texts are written by me and put together by me, but they are actually an index of something that has been happening in a particular time and maybe in different locations at the same time. It's very much, therefore, a book that has to do with the zeitgeist, with the spirit of the time, and often I wonder whether people in the future will be able to read the book as we read it today. It's very much a kind of slice of a certain moment. What I am interested in describing, and that is the reason why I am showing you these images, which are also, some of them, not all of them, part of the book. The book, because it is aimed at that kind of generational description or description of a certain slice of time in the disciplines related to architecture, if you want, is basically supported or is related to a series of images that I have been sourcing in the last couple of years from the internet. So that's maybe the other interesting thing about the book, that all these images that are in the book are kind of low-res, Creative Commons, so it's basically stuff that is available to everyone, that can be used without paying anybody any copyright, and that hopefully show a certain texture of what was happening in these years. So I was, let me try to, maybe I wanted to make a quick reference to Beck regarding this issue of the generation, because as much as you know, there are theorists like himself who talk about generations as talk about contemporary subjectivity as a kind of subjectivity that is freed from, or a biography that is freed from any sort of predetermined path. I very much doubt that this is the case. I think that we are simply determined by different factors, and those are the factors that perhaps are part of the book. These are already pages of the book. This is the intro of the book. I mean, as far as it is now, which is nearly in its final stage, and you see the kind of people that I'm talking about. I'm talking about Nick Leeson, I'm talking about Kurt Cobain, I'm talking about Julian Assange, Naomi Watts, David Einhorn, who probably maybe is not so well known, and so there is a generation of people that are part of what has been called Generation X, which I started to become interested in as I started putting together the background for the book. So I discovered that there was such a thing as Generation X, and that I was probably an early member of this generation, which is the generation that comes after the baby boomers, and that is born, depending on who you look or you talk to, will tell you between 61 and 81, more or less. And obviously these are very artificial categories. And I became actually quite interested in looking at it in this fashion and looking at this population of people when I came across a text that I am underlining here from William Strauss and Neil Howe, which I discovered during this research, that is called Generations, the History of America's Future, that have a very, I think, amusing theory, at least. I don't know to what degree this is believable, and I don't know to what degree this is something that is translatable to a larger population of people, because it's a theory that is particularly related to the American consumer. This is a kind of marketing type of technology or type of research. It's a research that tries to identify who are the potential audiences for products at a given time. And so he says nomads, generation, they have this theory that there are 4 typologies of generations. One is what is called the prophets. The second one is called the nomads. The third one is called the heroes, or they call the heroes. The fourth one is the artists. And every one of them has a particular way of operating, and they seem to find a certain repetition between generations. So, for example, Generation X is a nomad generation, and the previous nomad generation was the lost generation. So the lost generation of American writers that emigrated before the war, went to different places, etc., etc. And Generation Y, which is probably most of you are Generation Y, are the generation of what is called the heroes, and the heroes are the previous generation that was a heroic generation was the generation of the GIs, the generations that kind of reconstructed America after the Second World War. So I became actually quite interested in this. I became interested in the fact that I was part of what is called a nomad generation. Nomad generations are particularly resistive to engage in kind of collective endeavors. They are skeptical. They don't trust institutions. I mean, this is basically the description that these people, Strauss and Howe, make of Generation X. And I thought, thinking about myself and thinking about my colleagues, that was to a degree true, and that we were a generation that was no longer performing in the same way that, for example, the previous generation of architects was performing and was portraying themselves. I was also very interested in this idea of generation, precisely because I saw it as perhaps a potential escape from the whole culture of the individual star architect that probably represents more clearly the generation of the baby boomers. So that is basically why I decided to provide this context and this subtitle to the book. Sorry, and so I'm just moving on through the book. The next question, after in a way trying to give a context to this collection, disparate collection of texts or textual artifacts that was beyond myself, my own biography as a fact of consistency, was the introduction of the images. Some of the images that you saw in the book are part of this research that I was doing for a while, and some other people were helping me with it. And the question, once I decided I'm going to have images, this is not going to be a purely textual book, but there are going to be images, but the images are not necessarily going to be referencing the texts literally like books do. Images are going to provide a sort of atmosphere around the text. And so the question immediately was how to provide, how to mix those images so that they became the framing of the text. So first idea was to simply overlay the text and the images in this way, and you see in a way some of the themes that came out during this research. This is the death of Franco. I was born in Spain, and therefore there was a very, I think, important moment for me, which was that I grew up in my early life is within the dictatorship, and then after I became 12, Franco dies, and the whole democratic transition happens. And so some of these images refer very directly to my own biography. Some of them refer to a wider generation. I think other friends of mine, American friends of mine. I think Generation X, by the way, is an American-driven generation. It's the first generation that probably grows sharing TV globally, and that is a media that is during this period primarily controlled by American companies and American culture. Vietnam War is obviously a very important moment for this generation, and a little bit earlier, things that I don't remember very well, but were part basically of what was happening in Europe at the time, were Prague and the '68. But then there are other things that so I bring some of these very important moments of the generation. There are also other references like Deepwater Horizon catastrophe, or Bhopal catastrophe, or the sarin attack, or Chernobyl, or Ground Zero, or other things that are maybe perhaps more related to my own experience, which is in this case the kind of assassination of two important Dutch people, Pim Fortuyn, who is a kind of right wing, and Theo van Gogh, left wing filmmaker, in Amsterdam almost at the same time. Then obviously, I mean, you probably can relate to some of these events too, because they are not so old, and so there are events in the photographs. There are characters. I talk about Assange, Bill Gates, Alan Greenspan, the Azores summit with Bush and Blair and Aznar. There are some of my personal interests also. Pierre Boulez. There are friends of mine, or people that probably you see around in London. So some of the texture of this referencing has to do with identifying certain characters that stand for certain values. Other things have to do with photographs or records of technologies that have developed in the last 45 years. Internet obviously didn't exist when I was born, but there are maybe more primitive technologies that were also very iconic of these years. At a certain moment, the euro was one of the things that probably had the biggest influence in my generation. Other cheap flights, AIDS, food, the kind of globalization of local food is also some of the phenomena that are referred by this visual material that frame the texts, and that is in the book. Pills, Prozac, ecstasies, Viagra, crowds, Woodstock, mass games in Korea, Chinese factories. These are the references that cities, this kind of generic city that has been growing everywhere. So I mean, the pages that you are seeing are actually pages that form an earlier version of the of the book, the first version of the book, when I started thinking of how to use these images to frame the text. Sometimes I use also my own work to refer the book or the work or the kind of character of other architects, movies, signs of the whole emergence of iconographic or re-emergence of an iconographic culture, attacks, more characters. So I think that is basically what makes the what I was trying to form in the book. And then the question obviously was that sorry, I shouldn't have gone so fast. You see, what I was trying to do here was to print the text above the images, so that the images become the background to the text. And obviously, that for a book that is 500 pages and mainly a textbook was actually not a very good idea. So eventually, we came up with this idea, which is the way the book is designed. Which is that the images are almost like staples, almost as if the images are fixing the text to a certain time, and they appear in this way, and they turn the page. So there are, here you see almost like 3 staples that are fixing 2 pages, and these, sometimes there are less staples, there is only 1 staple per page, and sometimes, as I was showing you, there is just 1 big staple. That depends very much on the availability of images, of certain relationships that are happening in the assembling of the book between the images and the texts. Sometimes there is this kind of same band, this series of horizontal series of pictures, almost as if it is a movie. Becomes more frequent and smaller. Sometimes there are strange situations where some of these images, for a certain reason, move, and all these attachments between the text and the images are maybe obscure to a degree to the wider public, because they are mediated through my own interest in some of these images and the relationship that occurs between the images and the text. The other idea that is behind the relationship between the images and the text is that the images are, as I said before, not illustrating the texts literally, but trying to produce new relationships between these general cultural wider background to the book and the texts themselves. For example, the OMA text that I wrote in El Croquis in 1992 is no longer serving to support the photographs of the drawings and the models or the buildings of OMA, but a series of images that relate to young, successful people working together, simply because that is some sort of almost biographically filtered relationship between OMA and the pool of images that I could source. So one of the things that have happened during my lifetime is that very successful people have become increasingly younger across a wide range of industries. I mean, it also existed in Elvis Presley and James Dean. Those are probably the origin of this tendency, but it's a tendency that has been intensified and is referred here to through some sort of personal experience to OMA. In the case of Herzog and de Meuron, the text of Herzog and de Meuron is pinned down by a series of fabrics, fashionable fabrics that have been also produced as kind of luxury items during these few last decades, or the text of Eisenman. I'm now giving you examples of how images and texts are detached but are aimed to produce new assemblages between them. Eisenman's text from El Croquis also is no longer illustrated by the projects, but by some sort of idea of the new artificial through photographs of drugs, legal and illegal. Some other texts, on the contrary, are seeking convergence. So these ones are almost like trying to match certain idea with an architectural text. Some other ones are, and I think that here we are also starting to, no, maybe some other ones have to do with, for example, the illustration of the scientific autobiography, which is a text from 2004, actually 2002 and 2004, because it has two iterations, has to do more directly with a correlation between the facts that are related in the text. So some of these people are listed in the text or are related to some of the things that are being said simultaneously, and obviously it's a kind of biographical sequence. Again, sometimes the text is referred to news that are taken from different times during these 30 years, or to characters that I refer to in the text. So sometimes there is kind of consistency, projects. Again, there are some moments in which there is some sort of more obvious alliance between the text and the project. Sometimes it's more obscure. Sometimes it's almost trying to counteract the text. This is a text that was published in 1994, but it was actually a text written in 1992. And this is a moment in which I was very interested in trying to deal with globalization, late capitalism, etc., to capture that into some sort of new theory. And the text has this kind of almost heroic tone of, now we live in the new brave world of late capitalism and we should fully embrace it and it's great and so on and so forth. But then looking at the text from this perspective, perhaps I try to do some sort of sobering exercise of counteracting the text with images that refer these big disasters of late capitalism. Or sometimes there are almost ironic references between, there are 3 interviews also in the text. This one by Rumor van Thorn, related to my tenure at the Verlage, where the menu of a school is related literally to menus and to this phenomenon of some sort of globalization of local cultures, like sushi is now global and kebab is global, and so on and so forth. The text is, the book is also structured, and here probably I need to explain a little bit beyond this kind of relationship between the text and the images, what are the other instruments that I have set in the text, so that there is a kind of larger consistency between the different texts. The text is split into 4 areas of performance. The first one is called global positioning systems, and includes texts that are primarily written during my time as a student, and maybe my time while I was working at OMA and when I was teaching here, and early years of FOA, so kind of early moments of my career in which I was trying to locate what contemporary practice of architecture could be, using the advantage that I was given, for example, by El Croquis, to go and visit the schools of the star architects, and it was kind of industrial espionage, but generally speaking, the idea of these texts is to see what was happening and how could one locate itself within that picture. This is the series of texts that are including here. So there are all these El Croquis texts. There are also an installation for the Spanish pavilion in the Venice Biennale that was literally about some sort of machine that locates material organizations in the context of the stock market. There is the scientific autobiography, which is a text that refers to a number of these ideas of how to locate myself in the ongoing context. There is another chapter, another area of performance, which is related to academic practices and the discourse of the discipline, and that has to do primarily with my engagement with as a teacher here or at Columbia, Princeton, UCLA, Yale, the Berlage, obviously, but also my engagement with a number of conferences like the Yeni conference or the Urban Age, which I also had to prepare certain texts for these conferences, and they are also included into this chapter. The chapter is called, as you see, Breathing Sciences, and so there are things that maybe some of them have not been published. For example, there is my bid for the Städelschule, which is a lost bid. Ben van Berkel, who is a good friend of mine, who used to teach also here, got it. But I still think that it's interesting to read the text that I presented for the bid as a kind of document that happened at a certain moment and in a certain situation. There are briefs of studios. There is the brief of the last studio I did in Princeton, which is about localizing networks. So it's almost like there are also the texts that were published by Eni magazine as a result of the Eni conferences. These kind of texts that have to do more with education, with debate, with the discipline, are embedded in this second area of performance. The third area of performance is practice, and here there are texts that I wrote sometimes as kind of internal memos for a project I was doing in the office, or texts that I wrote to illustrate the work of FOA, who was my office at the time, or texts that I wrote in respect to other people's practice, but not in a kind of comprehensive manner. So here there are, for example, the intro to phylogenesis, or there are memos, for example, that I wrote to the team during the bid for the Olympics, or there is the Hokusai wave, which is a kind of reflection of my own practice published later on, or the high-rise phylum, which is also a reflection of on certain architectural typologies, or St. Mary's 30 St. Mary's Acts, a kind of text that I wrote about the Gherkin. So this is this is what constitutes the third area of performance. The fourth area of performance is called material politics. So you see that there are positioning systems, sciences, practices, politics. Those are the four wider areas of performance of these textual artifacts that compose the work, and the material politics is probably the grouping of the latest texts, which coincide probably with a moment in which, as Dean of the Institute, the Verlage Institute, I become particularly interested in trying to find out what could be the political agency of material organizations, and so try to develop some sort of political discourse that is not based on text in a way, but on practice, and try to analyze practices that could support these kind of political stances. And so here there are texts like the last one is the text on cheapness and democracy, or the politics of the envelope, which are probably some of the latest texts that I have written, but it goes back, and there are many texts there that, for example, are briefs or introductions to magazines, that the Verlage Institute used to do while I was during my tenure, and we're trying to focus lecture series and things like that. So these are the four areas of performance, and then there is another part of this structuring of the book, which is that the texts have been classified in a way in which they have templates, and they have actually 9 templates that relate to different genres of text. So the font, the number of columns in the text, the way the margins are located, whether the text is or not justified, etc., are part of these 9 templates that refer genres of performance. The first one is what I call the theoretical genre. This is an example of this theoretical genre. It's kind of sans serif. There are two types of fonts that I'm using, which are slightly, one is serif, the other one is sans serif, and they are slightly odd. They are not Helvetica and Courier or Times. They're called Accidents, Grotesque, and Foundry Wilson. So the choice of serif or sans serif has to do with the way in which the text related at that moment with a particular situation. So this is the format or the template of the theoretical text. This is also another example of the format of the theoretical text. This is the local SMART is an example of some sort of epistolar type of text. This is a letter of invitation as the Dean of the Verlage to different people who were supposed to be part of a lecture series called Local SMART, and therefore it has this kind of tone of a letter to somebody. This is also a letter that was published actually at the AA Files, which was an obituary of Cedric Price, which has also this kind of epistolar type. This is more what I call the journalistic template, which is double column, justified, serif, etc. It looks more like a newspaper as a format. Then there are other ones that are memos or what I call notarial. It's almost like writing the minutes or writing the memo of something. This is actually an unpublished document that I wrote the first time I went to see the Olympic site before we ever started doing the project, and it was called Grunge Olympics. It's also one of the documents. There are other texts that have to do with memories of projects that for some reason had, I mean, I selected only projects that are theoretical. So the virtual house was one, and also the United We Stand, the Bundle Tower was another one that are included into this selection of textual artifacts. Then there are what I call the propositive ones. I swear to you that Bosch Eli was here before he was fired from the central committee. But so you see how the manifestos operate as, so this is the kind of more manifesto-like format of text. Propositional, this is the this is also unpublished, methodological proposal for the Städteschule in Frankfurt. This one I think is also propositional, is a studio in Columbia, the brief of studio in Columbia. There are, as I said, 3 interviews. The interviews have also more the kind of format of a magazine, and so as you can see, the idea of having these 9 different formats and 4 different areas of performance has the purpose of embedding a certain ruthless rigor to the texts that produces an effect of almost chaotic nature. So you have sometimes pages like this one, where you have, well, here you have on one side sans serif, on the other side serif, on one side non-justified, on the other side justified, 2 columns versus 1 column. So the book naturally or automatically produces these kind of adjacencies between texts that were written for different reasons and that are suddenly put together in the book, adjacent to each other, and trying to somehow give an idea or a feel for this collusion of different inputs that form the matter of the project. And finally, there is the kind of there are a few other things that happen. One is this document, which is the real sniper log. Is a document that refers all the texts, depending on whether they were a kind of academic course, a lecture, a book, a magazine, a newspaper, an expo, etc., and locates it in time and in space in this graph, almost as if you are registering or scanning what are the targets that you have or that I had found during this process. This is also another document that I like very much, which is what I call a biographical calendar, and is also in the colophon of the book. Oops. I don't know whether this is okay. Is in the colophon of the book, and is basically made out of trying to select the texts, the events that happen on certain years that I have more memory of, or that I think are more relevant for me. And so it's interesting to see, for example, that as time goes back, you remember less things, but you remember things that are more related to things that happen afterwards. It means facts are entering into some sort of biographical life that is slowly disappearing. So when you look at the beginning, the early years, which some of them I was very small, but you know, there are things that I remember. There are things like ECM records founded in Munich by Manfred Eicher. So this is something that for me is very important, maybe for nobody else. But this type of events that later on you realize were important are then absent as the years advance. And so 2011, probably, if you read it and I read it, we come up with the most, almost the exact same references as important events happening during those years. And finally, there is another document that hopefully will help to navigate the book for those people who are interested in a deeper or maybe more superficial reading, which is a glossary where the words, I mean, this is a mock-up, it's not there yet, page numbers are missing, but you see that the words are going to be measured and scaled depending on how many times do they appear in the book. So material appears many times, icon appears many times, immunize not so many times, language many times. So depending on what is the importance, that you can almost in one glance see the most important words in the book popping out of the mass, and to see this kind of layering of words that constitute the nature of the book. This is basically the end of the book and the end of the explanation of the book. I was hoping that we can perhaps, I mean, I wanted to leave the audience with simply the sequence of the pages of the book in its current format, which is almost the latest one, so that this is almost like the texture that so you see basically the texture that is formed out of these different disciplines that are applied onto the materials of the book in order to give consistency, and this is basically everything I had to explain today about the book. I think that most interesting will be if we can engage in some sort of conversation about some of the issues that I put forward, meaning by that writing or generations or lineages or text and practice, whatever. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much. As Alejandro said, he's happy to take questions and indeed points that people want to raise. Tobias.
Hi. You said now in presenting the book that the section on material politics is probably containing the later things that you've written, and I think you said in a previous lecture that early on in your career you were kind of deliberately distancing yourself from politics. I was just wondering if you could say something about what might have caused, what caused you to revisit politics.
Well, I always, I think that I have always been interested in politics, simply because my upbringing is marked by the fact that I was born in a dictatorship, and then suddenly there was democracy, and I had to learn to vote. I remember going to school, and the teachers at school were teaching us what is to vote, which is something that probably to most of my colleagues, contemporary colleagues in the first world, I mean, Spain back then was not really yet part of the first world, and maybe now it's going back to the third world, but the fact is that I think that I have always had a very strong interest in politics, and I mean that was part of, in a way, my university in Spain, etc., was marked by demonstrations and all this kind of transitional period. Then, funnily enough, when I started teaching, I was part of a generation that was called the post-critical, that was basically trying to engage with a number of processes that were taking place, like capitalism, globalization, the kind of race or growth of the construction industry, the development of certain technologies that didn't exist before, and that I think that is a kind of something that I feel as if I am really part of a certain generation. We basically suspended the kind of critical stance in order to be able to engage with those processes. I remember the generation that taught me, whenever they were supposed to be politically engaged or critically engaged, they would basically say, I mean, you were not supposed to do shopping malls, you were not supposed to do skyscrapers, you were supposed to do schools and social housing. Those were the projects that were politically correct, and the other ones were politically incorrect. And I think my generation was a generation that was exposed to the dilemma of saying, okay, so should we do some shopping centers? Should we do some skyscrapers? Should we try to think about other things that are supposed to be bad because you are working for developers that are trying to extract profit from, etc., etc. That was the previous way of engaging the practice with politics, was by adopting that kind of negative position. And I think that at that point we deliberately suspended the questioning of those problems, and I think that was not entirely void of a political stance. Obviously, there was a certain. I mean, politics, if you think about it in the kind of wider sense of the term, is the management of regimes of power, or the relationship of architecture with regimes of power. And what we were trying to do was to engage with regimes of with the new regimes of power without necessarily engaging from a critical position. So I think that was a certain political attitude that was revealed to me as being conservative during the time when I was dean at the Verlaje, and I realized that there was a younger generation that is a little bit older than you, and that probably most of people here, where you could already identify that there was a departure from the position that my generation had taken in these respects. There was a kind of hunger to re-engage more deliberately with a political project, and so suddenly I bump into these kind of younger guys who were telling me, you are basically an asshole, and you are sold to the capital, and so on and so forth. And I thought, well, you know, that cannot be. I was, when I was a student in Madrid, I was in the demonstrations fighting the police and running away from them and doing these kind of things that you were supposed to do back then, because that was and so it became apparent to me that there was a different, that needed to be a certain correction of that radical detachment from political stance that we had adopted in order to engage with those new processes. And the whole, it's not, I mean, there are some older texts here that are pre-realization of this, but there are, most of these texts have to do with recognizing that and trying to develop a certain theory that would give to architectural practice a political stance without necessarily having to say you should not do shopping centers, or you should not do high rises, and so on and so forth. I think that's a little bit the history of this position.
I mean, I understand that sort of differentiation, although it only seems to me, in a sense, a local version of a much more kind of fundamental problem in the 20th century, where ultimately, it's clear that sort of within modernism, a lot of architects were able to feel, how can I put this, that socialism and the avant-garde, even if they weren't becoming one, they kind of ran in parallel and were gradually getting closer and closer to each other. Whatever else, we've learned that was a sentimental fiction. I mean, that fiction is dead and gone, whatever people want to put in its place. It seems to me that the entire relation has to be kind of rethought. I think in the room, if people were asked, what's a progressive position in architecture, to use an old sort of 30s, 40s word, progressive, no one really would have a basis for knowing. No one would have a basis for being able to make the judgment that this form of architectural design is progressive. We could probably still sustain the notion of reactionary.
Well, I had a very interesting anecdote about this, which was also related to this moment of realization, which is that when I was dean at the Verlaje, I tried to organize a lecture on politics, a lecture series on politics, and I was trying to find architects that would be associated to a kind of progressive position or left-wing position, and architects that were associated to a right-wing position, and I could not find a single architect who would be able to declare him or herself conservative or right-wing. I couldn't find anybody who would stand there publicly and say, I am a right-wing architect, I am a conservative architect.
Because they were too busy working.
Maybe that. But even the people that are incredibly busy would resist to be called conservatives as an architect.
Sorry, can I?
It is quite an interesting debate in terms of the politics of architecture. But don't you think the whole position of architecture and even architectural students, or the way people engage, how architecture engage with the society also depends on what the society, the position of the society, or where society is at. Because if you look at a lot of the students or the younger people who are involved in architecture and the building industry in Africa, their views are completely different to some of the issues we're discussing. They're taking a much more stronger line, very similar to what you were describing of when you were a student. So the whole approach of being progressive depends on where you are and what the situation is, whether you're in the, as you said, the first world, or whether it's going back to the third world, and that will actually change the approach of both in terms of how architecture is seen and how people see architecture. But before, one question I really was in my head, which is moving the discussion a little bit, is that earlier on, at the beginning of your lecture, you mentioned the issue of people not being patient, students not being patient enough, and not being able to read a book from start to finish. Do you believe, the two questions, it would be nice for you to expand a bit more on that, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing because of all the other medium which we are now exposed to, whereas I remember even when I was at university, the book was the most important document you had. Nowadays, I'm not so sure it's the most important document. Could you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, what you say is, I mean, in a way, what really surprised me about that statement is that there is this young guy who comes to me and says, you know, I come from a generation where I have never read a book from the beginning to the end. And I said, well, you know what? I used to do it, but I don't do it any longer. I open a book, I look the back, whatever, and maybe I scan certain things that I'm more interested in, and I go to the next one, or I go into a website. So that is, I think, becoming a certain way of dealing with text as a consumer of text. Probably
that can't be to do with, in a sense, technology. I mean, it doesn't seem to me it's enough. I mean, if they don't finish the book, in a sense, you're saying they don't finish it if it's digital, you know, on the screen. So what you're saying is, once upon a time, people could read a long text, and now they don't, which is really equivalent to saying people are becoming assholes. I mean, there are some things about which it's just straightforward. It's not about the move from the Gutenberg galaxy to the digital.
But why do you have a kind of negative perception of people who do not read the whole book?
Because people who don't read the whole book are assholes, in my experience.
Well, I think that makes...
How do people going to see the deeper and the understanding the deeper meaning of your publication if you don't read through it?
I think that you can open this book at any given page. For example, at this one, look at the image, feel interested about the image, and then look next and see that there is a certain word that for some reason is evocative of a certain thing, and start setting up certain relationships that maybe I haven't even thought about. That is one of the things that I'm interested in the format of the book, that the way the relationship between the images and the text have been set are in a way through my own associations, but because I'm not saying what each one of these images is about, people will establish their own new affiliations between the images and the text, and I am interested in that phenomenon. By the way, the images will not be in color. This is because it's in a kind of intermediate. They will all be black and white. So I forgot to mention that the text, these 4 chapters, these 4 areas of performance, have this slightly colored hue of black, and the 4 together will actually produce black. There is some sort of graphic game going on, where one is a little bit more bluish, greenish, brownish, and purplish. But the pictures are all going to be black and white. And so, I mean, maybe I forgot to mention this, and I need to clarify that when the book is out, you will not see the pictures in color. This is
you know, you've mentioned, as it were, the student who wouldn't dream of finishing the book, and also the fact that you couldn't identify the conservative.
Yes.
I think you found them.
The people
it's the one that won't. I mean, you know, if you generalize it and ask what sort of things have characterized progressive emancipatory politics, it's that there's a certain self-discipline of the intellect to think things through, which requires a certain kind of traditional effort. And you don't pay your dues, you don't get in.
Well,
you know, long live Mao for saying, you know, no representation without prior investigation. I mean, perhaps someone wants to...
well, okay, yeah.
I have kind of 3 things I want to say. The first is that I think you shouldn't underestimate, or it's a mistake to undervalue the way in which my generation, which is below yours, engages with media. I definitely agree that there's a, in the speed with which we are multitasking between different formats and different types of content, certainly the depth of knowledge is lost. But there's a breadth, there's a different kind of spatial memory which is involved in engaging with media. The second thing is that I also wouldn't underestimate there's a certain training which is involved in being able to focus on long pieces of text. People who are interested in, I have the intention of reading this book cover to cover. I do it frequently. But you have to kind of train yourself to do that. And I think people that are interested in reading and will always do that. I even though the brain is modified by the way in which we engage with the internet, that's not to say that we're incapable of reading a book cover to cover. It's like if you have never read a book, probably if you were born 100 years ago, you wouldn't be someone who would read a book then either. I think that's just characteristic of the type of person you might be. The third thing is that in terms of progressiveness, I find this quite an interesting point. And I'm very interested by what you say about a lack of criticality at the point at which architects could be said to change from being perhaps agents of social change, the social housing, the weakness or the deterioration of the sovereignty of nation states, the rise of globalism, and the rise of a particular type of economic ideology, namely sort of neoliberalism. Because then in terms of progressiveness, at least for my generation, what I see, the only way in which you can be progressive is not a political stance in the left or the right, but is one against a particular type of political and economic and social ideology. And I think if anything, the period that we're seeing at the moment, the types of situations we see in places like Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Greece, shows that we're in the process of moving beyond neoliberalism into a radically new social model. And that's, I think, it's the ability to imagine, if you like, an alternate form of society that constitutes the basis for progressiveness. That would be my point.
But I would like to say that I don't underestimate the way your generation deals with media. I simply think that what this guy was telling me was an index to a certain tendency that you can see more generally, and that you can see even in myself. I used to read books from the beginning to the end, and lately it's very difficult for me to have the time to read a book from the beginning to the end. It's a kind of matter of fact. Whatever that does to your brain or to your politics, that maybe is to be considered. I think that the thing that you say, the text as the vehicle of democracy or political consensus or lateness, if you want, the capacity that text has to actually enable democracy is true. Sloterdijk has beautiful texts about this, but I am a little bit less negative about it than you are. I think that used to be the vehicle, and I think that because of the abundance of text, because of the media that we operate with, perhaps there are ways to be found about other ways of reading, about other ways of crossing material. In some ways the experiment here is about finding out a format that has more to do with that way of reading than with the traditional linear way of reading a book.
Well, certainly, on my side, let me recant. Actually, I think the real problem, I think people do actually finish books. I think the problem is it's the wrong ones, which is a rather different point.
That is also.
The point I think about democracy is that however you frame it, in whatever medium, whatever format, it depends on the capacity for detailed propositions, rather than cries for loyalty or identity. progressive politics, whatever it is bound to have one hand tied behind its back compared with other religious, communitarian, whatever, And that's, I think, the sort of, a central problem. It doesn't really go along with a particular technology. For all I know, the current situation may be better for it. I really don't know. I mean, maybe we should move on. We've sort of covered the political issue, I think, in the book quite a lot. But there's a lot more to it.
This is the more current, the more current interest. I mean, the other thing that you mentioned was this kind of shift, or the book is published at the moment in which we have, or that, in a way, my generation is a generation that lives through the race of the late capitalism, or is educated already within that paradigm of late capitalism, mostly. I mean, if we say, I would say late capitalism starts operating in 73 when the crisis of oil, the crisis of the kind of high modernist model that raised the beginning of postmodernism, etc., etc. That's almost that's when I am 7 years old or 5 years old or something like that. And so that goes on seamlessly until 2007. And now we see that there is another model. I'm not that optimistic as you are that these kind of new social models are actually going to function, and I am almost sure that they will not function in such a straight way as what some people think they will. In fact, I think what is happening now is that because of the crisis, everybody is voting the right. And I don't know what that is going to do to at least the developed world. But I don't think that you're going to ever be able to free yourself from the market. And I think that the idea that that is possible or even desirable, that you can split the economy from the politics, is a big mistake. I don't think that you can. I think that economy and politics are very deeply weaved into each other, and you cannot operate just politically, but you need to operate also economically if you want to be political. In fact, I think the last text of the material politics is the text on cheapness, which I don't know whether you know, is published in Log and also in this book, Living the Infinite City or something like that, the thing from the London School of Economics, where the argument is precisely that there are certain people who are maybe assholes in their own right, and who occupy positions of enormous power without being democratically elected, and that operate theoretically without any political alignment, but that have transformed the contemporary world. I'm talking about Stelios, EasyJet and Zara, and all these kind of cheapness things, as you know, as dangerous as they may be, and as dangerous as it is to say that these things are democratic, because they are in some ways. I think that they are in some ways, and I think in other ways they are absolutely not. Like every revolution, it has a problem. But I would be reluctant to think that now the situation is going to change, and suddenly you're going to be again in the position where the modernists were. I mean, what Mark started to refer, where modern architects were running in parallel with a society that was developing towards democratic model and towards a kind of industrialized model or economically prosperous model. and it was like seamlessly together. I don't think that we are going to go back to the point where, as architects, we are any longer be given the chance to dictate urban politics like they were. It's much more complex now.
I mean, in a way, it's made more complex by, I mean, it's the other half of my proposition, that the other side of it is you shouldn't also assume, as people assumed in the early part of the 20th century, that the avant-garde and corporate power would always be opposed to each other. You know, in a sense, the avant-garde at one point knocked on the door and they were welcomed in.
Yeah. Yeah, they were basically the people who formed the basis of corporate power. So the whole modernist avant-garde was absorbed by corporate power, and I think that dramatically changed the politics of architecture, the material politics, in the moment in which the enemy swallowed the avant-garde.
Is there something to be said for the fact that globalization, and the fact that you have the influence of the influence of the developed world and also the developing world all moving in one direction in terms of not just political and economically, where it's all about the market. The market seems to be the issue, and the fact that it's actually creating two kind of classes, those who are really pushing very hard in terms of globalization, and then you have the issue of the effects of it, which is part of the issues that's been raised, in terms of the new generation being more concerned about the effects of what that globalization is doing and how it affects what architects are doing. Because at the end of the day, there's a whole conversation going on about, you know, what legacy are we leaving for our children and our children's children or for the future. Whereas the avant-garde, the commercial world is ignoring all of that. It's still about how do you progress economically and financially without actually taking on board the real issues. Whereas the younger generation are beginning to be more and more pushing in terms of the legacy of what that globalization is doing to economics.
Well, I mean that is what this is what is surprising.
Progressive nature of architecture, and although the hands are being tied, it's not being tied from a political sense, but it's being tied from the economical and the globalization. So which means the direction change, whether all is going the same direction, I'm not sure.
I don't know what will be the direction. What I am interested in this respect is the fact that the people from this guy's generation are again interested in politics. My generation at the very beginning was not talking about politics, was trying to, in a way, say, okay, you know, we are architects, let's deal with the kind of concrete. Then obviously when you practice, you realize that you can never get rid of politics and that everything that you do is finally dictated by politics, and therefore you need to find a way of relating your practice to the regimes of power that contain it. I mean, there is probably no discipline that is as mediated by no artistic discipline that is as mediated by power as architecture, because it involves very substantial resources. A musician just needs a piano or a guitar, but we need, in order to practice deliberate engagement with power. And I think it's indicative that this is, I mean, going back to this whole thing of Strauss and how about the generations, that the generation Y is similar to the generation of the GIs, the generation that after the war reconstructed the country in the U.S. And had a much more collective and positive spirit than the lost generation that basically left and did different things and maybe became interested by themselves, but didn't generate the force to become consistent as a generation and to propose an exit out of the crisis of the 29. So I think it may be that is by chance, but it's quite interesting to see this kind of alternation of generations, which they associate to the fact that you are born what they call at a high or at a low, or kind of the things are looking good, or when you are growing up, and therefore you are confident and you will have a certain outlook to life. And because of these economic cycles are constantly changing depending on where your generation is grown in respect to that cycle, your outlook to life is entirely different. And I don't know whether this is applicable, for example, to people in the third world, as you are saying. Maybe they have a different type of cycle. It was certainly not necessarily applicable to the people that grew up with me in Spain, because there was no awakening happening when I was in Spain. It was actually dictatorship, etc., etc. So I'm not sure whether you can apply this classification to the practice of architecture, to some sort of theory, social theory. But I am quite interested in starting to think that architects are not just by themselves stars that operate and that invent a whole Weltanschauung, but that we are somehow much more mediated creatures.
I think that's right, and certainly it's true that a lot of students think and feel about political issues. The obvious problem really is that doing that, how can I put it very bluntly, it leads to anguish rather than to organization. Does someone here want to?
Yeah, just probably to add on the last comment, and probably on Mark's last comment, and on the political debate that came to the table. It is true that this is a sense of political engagement, especially in young students or young teachers, and at least my generation. I'm not so young, but my curiosity is towards your experience in relation to the discipline as a device to generate a political engagement.
Why? Sorry, why?
The discipline as a device to generate a political engagement to any agenda, whatever this is. Because it seems to me that architectural power to engage with social change has shrunk in capacity and probably even in scale. I see a lot of small interventions that are very enthusiastic and very propositive, but at the same time, they're very limited by it's probably, yeah, it's a scale issue to a degree.
I mean, this is a very, very difficult thing to do, which is basically what I've been trying to do in texts like the politics of the envelope, which is to identify a certain concrete domain within architecture where perhaps it is possible to start talking about political terms like transparency, for example, or insulation or ventilation as political actions. I think that this will be much more. I can see that as the only way to truly engage with politics by using material agency as your device. I mean, it probably has to do with what Mark said before about detail. It's not so much about whether you are aligned to the left or to the right or how do you position yourself, but is how do you get into the concrete problem of making a building, and in what way some of the effects that you are producing by adopting certain materials or certain massing types, you are increasing transparency or decreasing transparency, or increasing or decreasing friction, or things that are deeply architectural but that have a very direct effect on how people conceive the world. I remember when I was in Holland, Herman Hertzberger saying that architects, right-wing architects, build vertical windows like that, like these ones, and left-wing architects build horizontal windows. That was some sort of idea. He said, when I was at school, what we believed was that horizontal windows were democratic and vertical windows were conservative. And I was...
On the grounds that...
that was their belief. And so I was, I don't know exactly why. I mean, I suppose that it has to do with vertical windows being associated to old buildings and horizontal buildings, or horizontal windows being associated to new buildings, are therefore more democratic politics.
It's like the police find it easier to throw people out.
But the funny thing is that I was talking to Jeff Kipnis one day, and I told him this thing. I said, "Oh, he's damn right, because when you have a vertical window, you are looking from the land, from the ground to the sky. You're looking at the world through some kind of scope that tells you that there are layers and there are things that are eternal and permanent, and you see vertical relationships in life. And when you are framed horizontally, you see your peers and you see the horizon. And he immediately understood that was absolutely right, that the scope that a horizontal window or a vertical window produce is psychologically progressive or regressive. I mean, you can hypothesize about these things and believe them or not believe them. I almost, when Jeff said that, I almost thought, well, yeah, maybe it's not just a matter of relating to old or new building typologies. Maybe there is something really deep about the scope that open.
There might be a difference between the Dutch and the Belgians.
I think you also look at it as a vertical window. So you got one person who can see the whole vista vertically, and horizontally you actually have a lot more people actually. It's a lot more democratic.
I mean, but one of the things about that is that it politically seems to be problematic. Just let me give you an example. When I was teaching in Columbia, the ex-Chief Justice of South Africa, Albert Sachs, was there. In his kind of last years in the court, he'd taken enormous pains and trouble to be involved with the design of the Supreme Court in South Africa. He showed the project, stressing at every moment that their intention was to design something which was welcoming, which showed within it the work of local groups and whatever. It was an incredibly fine and optimistic point. What he was above all concerned to do is to stop this Supreme Court from in any way representing power. Now the problem there is at a certain point down the line in South African history, it's either going to have to represent that power and use it, or not. And it'll just be a there's a problem. Because I think one of the things about being interested in politics is you can't shy away from wanting and getting power.
True. True. I mean, that's absolutely true. I think that I am interested in politics because I realize that in order to practice architecture, you need to engage with regimes of power, and the only way to do that is to understand how power operates and try to get in there. There are architects like Peter Eisenman who would. I remember Peter Eisenman in this room saying one day, I am interested in control, I'm not interested in power. And I think if you look at his work, he's done right. He doesn't give a damn about power, and that's probably why he hasn't built very much, because he was interested in other things that have to do with the discipline. I mean, what you say about representing power, one of my favorite examples of this is the parliament in Bonn, which I don't know if you know it, but it's designed by Günter Benisch, and it was built at the time when Germany was deeply ashamed of the kind of Nazi past, etc., etc. And when they built the new parliament, they made sure that the room was basically going down from the ground, and that it was visible from the outside. So you are there, and you are standing in front of the building, and there is a big glass, and you see the people in the parliament debating. I think that this is very powerful. The parliament used to have to go up to a slightly higher level, and there was a moment where you were deprived from visual, certainly physical contact, but also you are not supposed to see what is happening in there. So transparency, relationship with the ground, even physical openness are, I think, deeply political actions. And this is not about building shopping malls or building housing or saying that you are right wing or left wing. It has to do with how material organizations establish relationships with communities that make the relationship between those communities more amenable to produce political progress, to even out or spread out more evenly power. And I think that this is the kind of things that I am more interested in as an architect. How material agency literally produces these assemblages with a certain community that changes it radically.
I mean, I think from an architectural point of view, surely that, it feels it must be right. I mean, that as an actual practice, I mean, individually, the architect can have whatever politics. At a definite and architectural level, what does seem to be the case is that architecture can make and transform like material situations. In sort of very particular ways, because it actually constitutes them.
Exactly.
In some sense. So I completely.
I mean, I remember this example that Richard Sennett always talks about also somebody who is not an architect, who is him, who gets involved with community committees in New York City to locate a market in Harlem. And they kind of debate for a long time whether the market has to be located in the border between Harlem and the Upper West Side, or in the center of the kind of Hispanic community in that area of Harlem. And they, after many discussions, decide that this has to be located in the center, so that they produce some sort of grouping of that community. And then he says he saw the whole thing failing miserably, and wished that they had not located the market in the center of the community, but on the border of the community, because that would have actually engaged the community with the kind of wealthier communities to the south of Harlem, rather than constituting it and representing it as a ghetto, which is basically what happened. So these kind of actions are incredibly powerful politically, but we are not able to articulate our practice in a way in which we make those things visible.
Okay, I'm worried that we're keeping Alejandro at it too long. The last question, and then I think we might conclude. Yes, the last one.
One of your topics was
Mediators, yeah.
Where do you see the role of architects in terms of mediating in present day or in the future? Because it appears to me that in terms of influencing what's happening in our city at the moment, the architect being the lead consultant in any kind of form of engagement in terms of development seem to be losing ground to other.
To the mediators.
Well, it's whether the architect, in the past, you see the architect who mediates between the people of power and who have the finance, and in terms of whatever development is happening, the architect will be linchpin to make that happen and deal with that mediation. Now, it appears the architect lost that role, and it's now being counters, QSCs, project managers. The architect is not the first, and even in the role of architect, that position of being a mediator to make things happen seems to be.
Yeah, I mean, this is the topic of some of the texts that are in the book. I mean, that is said, I think, probably 3 or 4 times in the book. How architecture has suddenly been lost the power to exercise that kind of mediation, and in a way that the text about mediators has to do with identifying a new character, which is not just a technical character. The technical character is in a way much more difficult to fight, because I think we've also, as a species, have been destroying our own capacity to survive by doing too many stupid things. And so society, in a way, has started to find people who are able to talk in a different way to them, in a way that they can perhaps understand. But I don't know where I was going with it. So the idea of the mediator was simply to identify that even from not just from a technical perspective, but from almost like a social perspective, there is a class of people who are taking over that role. And this was part of a lecture series at the Verlaje that I did on mediators, and I called in all these people that are in that role of suddenly appearing in between the architects and the client and discussing architecture, not discussing costs or technology or other things. I mean that.
Do you think the architect should actually fight and take that role in the future, or try?
Well, but surely the point, I mean, surely Alejandro is kind of right. I would only add in a way that to some extent that's always been true. Maybe it's more true now. I mean, that people are sort of emptying out. And I think it goes back to the fundamental paradox about architecture as some kind of profession. In the sense you can see, in the obvious cases of medicine and of law, they both seize and are assisted in seizing a kind of legal monopoly over a particular kind of work. But the architects never got a legal monopoly over anything, partly because it couldn't. So really they have the legal monopoly over being have a set of responsibilities as a consequence. It's not a very good deal. Looked at like that. I mean, so there was no object. Now, when that's just an ideological question, it doesn't matter too much, but as lawyers and doctors know, it's crucial that you can legally specify, as it were, an economic area, and you get it.
Well, there are places, I mean, for example, I think one of the reasons why Spain has had such a good ride, or architects in Spain have had such a good ride before the crisis terminated it, was that in Spain architects are vested with the power, or the association of architects are vested with the power to decide whether a building has to go up or not. I mean, the association of architects can basically stop a building by saying this is not appropriate. We, as the people in this society that are able to dictate this, we can decide whether this happens or not. This is a kind of, politically speaking, an impossible situation to continue. I think it will disappear. It will disappear once the institutions in Spain, or as the institutions in Spain become more and more democratic and developed, etc. That will be a position that a professional body cannot sustain, and that is logical on one side. Logical on another side, I think is probably not very good for the practice, for the profession. I think that democratic or the institutions that have come to affect more effectively that decrease of the power of the architect in, for example, the British system, which is obviously a very well developed democratic system of planning and so on and so forth, has been institutions that are almost like paralegal, such as CAPE. I mean, CAPE doesn't have all these kind of committees that people say, well, I mean, they're full of shit and whatever. But finally, these committees force clients to sit down in front of a committee that may be more or less bright and to explain the project from an architectural perspective to that panel. Once that moment happens, and even if the report from CAPE or from this kind of beauty commissions in the Netherlands, which is the kind of origin of this whole thing, is the beauty commission in the Netherlands, then there is the quality commission in Barcelona, and then there is CAPE. I mean, that's literally the way the idea moved around, and these institutions have had mixed fortunes depending on who was running them, how much money they had, etc., etc. But I think the fact that there are these institutions, and these institutions do not have the right, the legal right to give planning permission, because finally planning permission is in the hands of the council. But if there is a negative CAPE report or a negative report of the Commission of Quality, then you are in trouble. And your clients know that they are in trouble if at some point in the process they are not going to be able to sit down with their architect and explain the project to people who are going to be concerned about architecture, even if that has no vested legal powers. Is a situation that has potentially an enormous effect. And I mean, when you are talking about the role of the mediator, I think that these kind of institutions are more democratic than the mediator system. So if a society is capable of establishing these sort of bodies that I don't know in what way people are elected into their bodies, or that is what becomes always problematic. But if a society is able to construct this type of bodies, then the role of the mediators, who are, I think, sometimes very positive. If you have a good mediator, it's great. They can solve the problem, they understand architecture, they can explain it to the client better than you, they understand you and they understand the client and they understand the public. So there are some very good mediators around. But there are also some very bad ones and very corrupt ones. And obviously that system is more democratic if those characters, which were the characters that I try to invite into that lecture series, are replaced by basically bodies.
Okay, I think we've